to the FLC webinar entitled Your Move, Case Study in Licensing. My name is Tom Stackhouse. I am the Deputy Associate Director here at the National Cancer Institute and NIH, National Institutes of Health. And I am also Vice Chair for the Education and Training Committee for the Federal Laboratory Consortium. And today it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ida Shum. Ida is the Senior Manager of Business Development for Samsung's Advanced Institute of Technology's Open Innovation Group, where her primary role is to acquire intellectual property assets for the company. She is also charged with developing partnerships with startups, universities, and federal labs. Ida earned her JD from the University of Notre Dame and is a trustee for the Licensing Executive Society and serves as chair of the Industry University Government Interface Sector. I first met Ida several years ago while she was employed by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and when we both were serving on the executive board of the Federal Laboratory Consortium. At that time, Ida served as the Far West Regional Coordinator for the FLC and was recognized for her outstanding leadership role in technology transfer as the Far West region's outstanding laboratory representative. It is definitely a pleasure to once again be working with Ida on this webinar. And so now, Ida, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Federal Laboratory Consortium for having me today, and Lauren and Carl of the staff for putting this all together. So this webinar, just wanted to set the stage. It will be interactive, so I look forward to your participation. Feel free to ask any questions. Tom, our moderator, will provide them. We will have certain breaks, so we'll use that as an opportunity to answer any of those questions. So I'd like to start today. This is all about your move, looking at licensing in particular. And I think most of you know every deal that we have is different. If you substitute a company representative or a lab representative, you know, the results could be entirely different. And I think we all know that past performance is really no indicator for how to handle the future. And it's always one thing that I like to think is that, you know, if it's worked one way before, it doesn't mean that it'll work that way today or tomorrow. And if you find yourself saying that's how we've always done it, you know, I just caution you to be wary. So, you know, let's all take a trip down. These are some of my experiences at the federal labs that have had to do with licensing. And I'd like to have you put yourself in the shoes of you as the licensing representative and recognize that you will be, you know, part counselor, part advocate, you know, cat herder, all of those things. So some of the goals, it's, you know, what is a successful outcome? Sometimes it is a deal. Sometimes it is no deal. The other is, like I mentioned earlier, part counselor, advocate, and cat herder. You need to manage the expectations with your scientists, your management, the lab staff, as well as your licensing entity that you are working with. And you will always be in the role of troubleshooting, putting out fires, and dealing with how to identify issues and provide those solutions. And we all have this wonderful, or I used to have the wonderful job of being able to license government-owned patents. And you know, there's some of the most unique and amazing technologies that exist. So I want to set the stage with just the fact pattern. So just have everyone think about, we have a team of 6 scientists. We'll just say that they all work at this super federal lab. And just for ease, we're going to call these 6 scientists Abel, Baker, Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot. So go from there. The technology, it's a material that can be used for lots of different applications. There's industrial, clinical, molecular diagnostics, environmental, apparel. So, you know, think of it as a magical material. And this technology has, you know, received some great fanfare. A lot of those discoveries initially were published, you know, on the cover of Nature and Science, and you've had lots of requests from the news media. So what next? Hopefully we all have the fortune of having, a great technology that, and sometimes it's not always that case. Even if it isn't, we have to take these necessary steps. Walk yourself through the checklist. I think, file a patent application or check to make sure that a patent application has been filed. And hopefully you've done that before it was published, especially since now the U.S. has moved to a first inventor to file system. And it is really important, even if you know about the publication in advance, to work with your inventors so that you can prepare whether or not you want to file this patent application, what types of information you need, and is there the possibility that you want to preserve foreign filing rights by filing a PCT? And I think a lot of us run into the issues of, what is your budget? So how do we best figure out what the plan, what an IP strategy looks like? The next is taking a look at, we still have to satisfy, our fairness of opportunity. So we want to file a federal business opportunity announcement. I think, in my personal experience, I had, not a lot of my inquiries came from this avenue, but it is important to make sure that you do this. It's, I think, maybe a little different amongst the varying agencies between GOCOs and GOCOs, but it's still good practice to make this announcement that you have this opportunity available. And it's important to figure out what your scientists plan on doing. You might find that their plans may deviate due to the different goals of each individual. We had 6 scientists here, and that will come in. You might have to deal with conflict of interest, or you may want to, quote, have a conversation, one of those we need to talk moments, if they're going to be exposed to proprietary information or potential business plan information. And you want to know if that team has additional funding. Why? I think once you start fielding inquiries from outside entities, there's going to be possibly some applications that you didn't think of, and you might want to have those fleshed out with some preliminary data sets if possible, and make sure you cover that in your patent application if you haven't. And one of the things is, I always want to emphasize is you want to just continue to market that technology. I mean, it's good to get that technology out there. You'll find that once that technology has been published, you will have a lot of questions. You will learn both about the technology's possibilities and limitations, and take advantage of that exposure to learn about what industries, what markets, what applications that exist. And in all of this, we want to get back to just managing those expectations. I think when a technology gets a lot of attention, or if it gets no attention, you'll find that there are expectations or no expectations. And I think similarly, when things get out and people think it's a billion-dollar idea, well, that's exactly what it is. It's just an idea. It doesn't make any money until it gets into the hands of the commercial sector. So make sure you manage the expectations. Things will inevitably go wrong. So I think it's always interesting to see. In this fact pattern, we're going to say that we got 5 inquiries, which is fabulous. That's always interesting to see the number and diversity of companies that approach you in a licensing situation. I think that they have the tendency to make you run through your emotions. And I think by the end of it, after you get through that negotiation process, you'll hopefully build a deep understanding and respect for the party that you're working with. So let's go through the companies. Company A is a startup with a CEO who's a serial entrepreneur. The CEO mentions 2 lab employees may join after securing the license. Company B is a former lab CTO. He's a former lab employee, and he's now the CTO of Company B. He's secured a seed round from a very well-known VC. Company C It's a group of entrepreneurial students from a highly respected university. So think, you're a Caltech or MIT or Stanford or Harvard. Pick one. They've won a business plan competition, and they plan to fund the company with those proceedings. Company D, it's a medium-sized company in the pharmaceutical space. So we know that they have an interest in the life science area. And Company E is a large multinational company. So I think just for impression purposes, and I know I haven't given you a lot of information, what would you choose? And I'll turn it over to Lauren right now.
Okay, great. So basically what we're going to do now is we're just going to take somewhat of an informal poll, basically just to see how you all feel about these options. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give everyone a chance to raise their hand based on which option that they would pick. So if you don't know where the raise your hand button is, it's in your small part of your webinar controls. It looks like a blue button with a hand and an arrow. So if anyone wants to try that, I'll give them a couple of seconds to give that a shot. Okay, great. I see that you guys are seeing it. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put those hands down so that we can start the polling. So if you think you would choose Company A at this point, raise your hand now. All right. So far, no takers on A. What about if you would choose Company B? Raise your hand now. We've got a few coming in, 2, 3. Give people 4. Give a couple more seconds and see. All right, so some of you would go with B. If you would choose Company C, raise your hand now. All right, a few coming in. All right, not too many. Let's see. All right, so now if you would choose Company D, raise your hand now. All right, give a couple more seconds. All right, that's a few. So if you would choose all of the above, go ahead and raise your hand now. Okay, the overwhelming winner. We're at exponentially higher than any other option at this point. So everyone would choose all of the above at this time.
That's great. Everyone's going to be writing a whole bunch of licenses. I like to hear that. So one of the things is I'm really thrilled to hear that everyone wants to write everyone a license. I think we know that it's never easy and direct, and I think we'll learn that each company will have their own agenda and desires. So some of the things, like now that you have these 5 takers before you, request a business plan if you haven't already. It's important to understand what the goals of each company are, their resources, as well as their commitment to the technology. And I think we all recognize that it's a plan and things change, often quickly, rapidly, and often unanticipated. It's important to at least get a feel for who the CEO is going to be, what does their leadership look like, money, management, marketing, and technology. One of my previous directors at Lawrence Livermore used to always like to say 3M plus T. Does that company have the wherewithal to successfully commercialize that technology? And the business plan is a good tool to see who's legitimately interested, and it's essentially a small commitment. If they're going to take the time to put together that business plan and put something forward, it shows the type of effort that they're going to put into commercializing the technology. It's important to find out what each company needs. You have, I think, two companies here where you know that there's lab employees. That could be one, the lab employee has gone and become the CTO of the company. The other, you've learned that there's two other employees that plan on joining the team. What are the lab's resources, labor, expertise to be able to execute if the companies then come back, because you have other companies that say, well, we might need a CRADA or a work for others. What happens if you lose those scientists to the company? And what is the lab capable of making these resource commitments? And I think the last thing to take a look at is, setting deadlines, especially when you have so many different parties. It's important to hold both yourself and everyone else accountable. This also helps you weed out those companies that may not be as committed to the technology. So great, now you have put forward and asked each of the companies for a business plan. And with each of the companies, they all happen to request an exclusive license. So our plan of granting everyone a non-exclusive has just been blown out of the water. So company A, they want all fields, all countries. They're a startup. Company B, they're willing to take an exclusive for a filtration application. Company C, they want to use it for environmental uses, but plans to move into food and beverage. And Company D would like, the exclusive license for high-value life science uses. This is the medium-sized company. And Company E, they would like to use it for water purification. And then, they have other, since they're a multinational company, they have other plans for the technology. And, just further, companies B and E, they're open to a non-exclusive, but only if everyone else gets a non-exclusive. So now who do we choose?
All right, so now again, we're going to go ahead and do another of these informal polls, and raise your hands when I call out your answer choice. So for Company A, raise your hand now. All right, we've got one so far. Give it a couple more seconds to let someone else answer it if they like. Okay, we have a question first, if we could get a recap of the differences between Company A, B, and so on and so forth. Ida, would you mind just giving a quick overview of the companies again?
Sure. Company A is our startup CEO, who's that serial entrepreneur, and he's the one who mentions that there might be 2 lab employees joining after securing the license. Company B, they're the former lab employee who is now the CTO. So the lab employee who was part of that original Abel, Baker, Charlie team, he's left the lab, joined as CTO, and now they've secured a seed round from a well-known VC. Company C, they're entrepreneurial students from a technical university. They want a business plan competition, and they're going to fund that startup with those monies. Company D is your medium-sized company in the pharmaceutical space. They're the ones who have also asked for that exclusive in the pharmaceutical space. Company E is your large multinational company.
All right, so if anyone's still interested in A, I'll give people a little bit more time just now that they have the question in front of them. All right. So now if you would choose Company B, go ahead and let us know now with your hand raised. All right, we've got a couple of people choosing B. Okay, great. So now, if you would choose Company C, now's the time to raise your hand. All right, Company C is not too popular. Company D, if you would choose Company D, raise your hand. right, we do have a few of those. If you would choose company E, go ahead and raise your hand now. Okay, great. So now if you would take the last option, grant the non-exclusive license, and see who wants to take it, raise your hand now. All right. It looks like we are having another clear winner with your final option, Ida. The next runner-up was letter E.
Everyone wants to do licenses. I love it. I think there's other options as well. I mean, this is sorry to make you guys do a forced choice, but we would be here until tomorrow, I think, going up with all the different possibilities. I mean, I think, I think it's a good move, especially if like one of our things is to get the technology out to as many people as possible. And, I think the other consideration that some of you may have had is that often maybe you can try to carve out exclusive fields of uses. And if you do that, then we have to be consistent in terms of how we define that field of use, and also whether or not we can provide some geographic exclusivity. So I think those all require long discussions, or hopefully not too long, but some discussions with each of your licensees, potential licensees. And I think you're going to run into a lot of questions from, startup perspective. If they're raising monies from VC, they may stand by the fact that they say that exclusivity is a must. Why should me as the VC invest X million dollars into the company? On day one on the market, there's going to be potential competition if it's a non-exclusive license. So it could potentially dissuade some investors. And, what about the various companies that you have? Are there considerations for competitiveness? And I think we will see that in each of these situations, each company will have its pros and cons. So, I mean, before we get too far into it, each of these companies that I brought up, I mean, there's going to be some, federal lab considerations that we want to take into account. Small business preference. The first preference for granting any exclusive or partially exclusive licenses we want to give to small business firms if they show that they have an equal or greater likelihood as other applicants to bring that invention to practical application within a reasonable time. And, we find that, in the statute that the lab has to make reasonable efforts to attract those small businesses as licensees. And I think one of the things in terms of, what constitutes a small business, I mean, the Small Business Administration has size standards, and it depends on the average number of employees over the past 12 months, or it can depend on the average annual receipts over the past 3 years. And there is, a resource that you can go to at sba.gov where it's it provides the summary size and standards for each industry and sector. And I think for the companies that we've put forward, it's a tough proposition when we're looking at each of them, side by side. I did have a license situation where we had about 10 inquiries and 2 serious licensees. And in that instance, the small business wanted to understand what the preference for small businesses was. And I don't think that we have a, any true policy that's listed out. There's other programs within the government that mandate specific contract allocations to small businesses, women, and minorities, but there's no uniform guidelines with respect to licensing for the federal laboratory. So I believe the only thing that I had to reference was the statute. The next consideration is substantial U.S. manufacturing. One of the companies was a large multinational. So also under U.S. Code section with regards to licensing federally owned inventions, we have these considerations that it be manufactured substantially in the United States. And where that cannot happen, a waiver must be sought to manufacture outside of the United States. In the cases of an exclusive license, possibly a non-exclusive license, depending on the agency. So if you don't meet this requirement, you can seek that waiver. And that waiver, you can also get that waiver by providing some information to the agency with regards to what is called a net benefits clause, or thinking about, in exchange, if you don't do the manufacturing in the United States, how many people are going to be employed. Maybe there are high-tech R&D jobs that are going to be stateside in the United States as opposed to the manufacturing jobs. So the policy here is also, it varies. There is some notes that I've seen that this clause means production is physically located in the United States. And some of the questions that have been asked of some of my licensees in which we've sought waiver is, the components of the manufactured good, are they manufactured in the United States, or is it assembled into final production in the United States? If the answer is yes in these cases, then it would satisfy the manufactured substantially in the United States. And then there's all sorts of varying degrees, what really constitutes a substantial transformation of all of your goods. So the next thing that I want to point out is that we did have two companies that potentially could have a conflict of interest issue. And, especially those in which there were lab employees that were either thinking about joining or were now joining the company. So one of those considerations is taking a look that the process can't be biased because of any financial, contractual, organizational, or any other interests, and to avoid employee and organizational conflicts of interest or even the appearance of. So for most of for the agencies, it's highly recommended, and inventors, they are not permitted to participate in the actual negotiations of those license agreements with potential licensees. The conflict of interest arises there because the inventors personally receive a share of the licensing revenue. So I think there might be some more considerations. At this point, I think we are all still very fortunate in that we have all the companies. And you might want to compromise by providing everyone with that non-exclusive. And so you want to be able to think about, can you reach that compromise with the companies? Sometimes in the compromise, you will make no one happy. And what kind of support do you need? If you decide to grant the non-exclusive and decide to, not grant the exclusive, or if you grant the exclusive and decide to only go with two companies, what type of support do you need? Because there might be a potential for these companies to ask for, they might complain that there's some unfairness in the process, and you have to take a look at, go through, if you're in this situation where you have multiple companies, what are the pros and cons of licensing to each company? So right now, yes.
Just a quick question. When you have sort of neck and neck companies that you're going to do exclusive license for, maybe different fields of use, or maybe they're similar, and if they're really similar, how much does the inventor's input, I don't mean direct input, but more of that the company is interested in doing, for example, a CRADA with the laboratory? Does that count or not?
So I think it's a tough situation, especially if you have companies where the inventors plan on leaving. If it plays into the exclusivity, you have to see if the tech expertise isn't available at the laboratory, can you grant that exclusive? You probably could grant it, but if they don't have some of the I mean, I think we all recognize that what we are licensing are patents and copyrights, you know, in some instances copyrights for some of the contractor-owned, contractor-operated laboratories. But you have to see whether or not that's available because, you know, the lab employees, they also carry some know-how, whether or not we can grant know-how, right? I think that we recognize that as the labs, we cannot grant know-how or trade secrets, but having worked with those technologies on a day-in, day-out basis, they have that knowledge and expertise. So you do have to talk and be upfront with the companies that you're negotiating with to let them know that you have, you know, and you probably want to sequester or set aside those scientists in your discussions for these companies if they have technical questions. So I don't know that I gave you a direct answer, Tom, or whoever asked that question, but you have to assess the situation and make that determination whether or not you can grant that exclusive license. So let's go through all the pros and cons just so that we can have everything situated. With company A, again, it's, you know, the great thing is that you have a serial entrepreneur who's had some successful exits. You've now learned that, you know, two of your scientists, Abel and Baker, they plan to join the company after the license is executed. So, you know, in this case, they will have, you know, an advantage in terms of the know-how, in terms of how to make that technology work. In their business plan, they provide a license issue fee that's competitive plus an equity stake. So for company B, this is you know, the company that also asked for exclusive for filtration applications, and we know the scientist Charlie, he left the lab 2 months ago, you know, from the time in which we decided to put this technology out for licensing. He is now the CTO. He also has know-how as to how to manufacture the technology, and he's raised a seed round, and he's found a seasoned CEO that if they, and he's informed you that if they meet the deliverables, the VC will fund a larger Series A round. Company C, this is your entrepreneurial student. They want to continue working with the lab through that cooperative research and development agreement or work for others. They've identified a manufacturing expert at another university to make this technology on a large scale. And they have some money, you know, it's not a lot of money, it's a business plan competition money to be able to pay for some of the license fees. Company D, they are really pushing hard for the exclusive license because they're going after a high-risk, high-reward application. They recognize that they're going to be putting in substantial resources. You know, is there the possibility that you can carve out that exclusive license from the other companies? They are offering the most money. The company also happens to be, you know, backed by a high net worth individual who wants to make sure that the technology is also available for humanitarian purposes. And then finally, it's your large multinational company. You know, it's got some high visibility within the laboratory. They do not plan to, they have a significant U.S. presence, and they have the resources and they're willing to commit to the project. And here's some of the cons that I haven't shared with you all yet, but and we've kind of alluded to them. But company A, you know, the serial entrepreneur has not had experience in the industry that they are going after. And you know, here you have to manage the conflict of interest with the two scientists who you've learned that are going to join the company. They both have to be segregated from the discussions with your other companies who might have technical questions. And if you've signed into non-disclosure agreements with any of those other companies, you might have to protect, you know, their business marketing plan information. You have to make sure that you are also addressing, you know, fairness of opportunity with this company, as well as with the others. You know, whatever information that you have to make sure that it gets shared as best as possible. And then, you know, do you need to get a conflict of interest waiver from your agency for the lab employees that, you know, while they have not left the laboratory, but they are thinking about joining? it's probably one of those situations in which you want to inform the agency and at least give them a heads up. With company D, you are going to have to obtain that conflict of interest waiver from the agency in order to grant that exclusive if you choose to go down that path. And also you have to think about fairness of opportunity. I think a lot of times we recognize that scientists, after they leave the lab, they don't really leave the lab. They have a lot of friends in which they can still get information from, so you do have to warn your employees internally to not provide any information that they may, especially confidential information that they may come into contact with. And company C, as Tom pointed out, can you really, is it possible to grant an exclusive if some of your experts have left? And if this company says that they'll need, some additional work following on, is it, you have to ask, if the scientists that have left the lab, if they cannot help, can you still enter into this follow-on technology transfer agreement? So you also have to talk with the scientists that are remaining, Delta, Foxtrot, whether or not they have the expertise, the ability to be able to partner and work with this company to be able to get this technology out. And with company D, some of the cons is that, development will take a substantial amount of time. And they also don't have a concrete business plan. They still need to recruit technical staff and business CEO. And a business CEO, they're undergoing some management changes. And the multinational, they're offering the least amount of money, but they are interested in, seeing that the patent is filed across the world. They plan on manufacturing outside of the U.S. So in this instance, you're going to have to seek a waiver of the U.S. manufacturing from your agency. And their headquarters are in Asia, and they would like to enter into the license agreement with the Asian entity. So now you have all sorts of, I think, all sorts of twists and turns, which is not uncommon. And Lauren, do we also have a poll here?
The poll, I think, is next, but this leads right into it.
Yes. So I think, we've also, I think anytime you go into a licensing situation, there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, I think as Tom and I talked about, previously, there can be better or worse. Every licensing situation that you have is, going to be different. And as you learn more information, your thoughts may change as to who might be the best or better partner. And I think one of the best advice that I can give you is just to make sure you fall within the guidelines of all of our laws, regulations, and policies. Also, some other good advice that I got was just make sure you can go to sleep at night. So nothing here is not manageable, but you want to go through, like, what are your options again? Do you have a plan? And again, think about what type of resources do you need? Because sometimes your scientists that are leaving or your scientists may have, like, really good relationships with lab management. So you will find that you may be put into awkward situations. If you end up taking that non-exclusive route, what type of support do you need? So, here's where all the fun begins. And I think now that we've got a lot of these pros and cons fleshed out, I'll turn it over to Lauren again for a poll.
Okay, great. So now we're going to sort of have this be your quiz. So what's going to happen is you're going to see the choices on your screen, and this time you'll actually get to vote on your choice, and then I'll share the results with you at the end. And if you have alternative suggestions, you can feel free to send them to us as questions, and I'll make sure to read them off, or Tom will read them off. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead. Now it looks like most of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And now I will share the results, and now you can see how you felt about it.
Can't really see it.
Okay, well then I'll read off the results just in case anyone's having a problem seeing it. So we have 16% with all licenses non-exclusive and start negotiating with anyone who will do that. 66% to explore the exclusive licensing fields of use. No one chose auction it off to the highest bidder. 16% of you still want to get more information, and about 3% of you said you wouldn't choose any of those options. So I'm going to go ahead and take the results off the screen now so you can sort of resume your slides.
Thanks, Lauren. And so thanks to everyone who participated too, because I think we never know where these deals take us, and it's nice to, and maybe those were some of the options from the beginning. So thanks for participating. So I think, what do you want to do going forward? Well, I think getting more information is still going to be very important, but sometimes you can only get so much information before you're forced to act. I think some of the things I think we all recognize that maybe doing nothing is not the right answer, because ultimately that results in no technology transfer, and it probably has some pretty large impact because you have a lot of technologies out there, there's a lot of competition, and so, for example, if you say that you have this great biometric technology for a mobile device, you're not just competing against other fingerprint readers, but iris scanners, vein scanners, that all work via LED or IR. So there's, a lot of, and this is partly, goes into missing that market window. And you don't want to miss that technology window in order for that technology to gain traction. And it's important when you have buzz around the technology to understand what the market needs are and what the time frame for delivery is. A lot of times it's something almost as intangible as just being at the right place at the right time. And and while it's not the goal at the federal labs to maximize royalty, it does provide a benefit to the inventors and the institution in some small respects. And you want to take that opportunity right now. You don't want to anger potential licensees, because I think sometimes we don't know who we're dealing with, and it also hurts the reputation of the lab not to act. So I think one of the
and I think it could even trigger some congressional inquiries and that type of thing.
Yeah, we have had those, and it's not fun when you have the Inspector General sitting in your office. And I think if something bothers you with a company, I've had an instance where, there were two lab scientists who were thinking about joining a company, and they asked, well, why can't we just fund that company so that they can pay the license fee? Well, I tried explaining to them that that was a conflict in which they would be taking their own personal resources and committing it to an outside company, which would then be engaging into business with the laboratory. Round and round we went. We had to bring in, we had to also have that explained by our conflict of interest coordinators to make sure you know your resources within the laboratory as to who you can reach out to get assistance when you are faced with a situation. I think for those of you who selected non-exclusive, one of the great things about granting this non-exclusive is that it makes that technology widely available. You have the ability to grant those licenses. You can license to more entities. And on the flip side, I put these side by side because more may not always be better if you're looking at market size, market readiness. You have to take a look at that technology stage. Is it readily adopted and adaptable? How much resources are going to need to go into it? And if you do that non-exclusive license, are we also jeopardizing, that company that wants to go after a high-risk, high-reward application because they might need regulatory approval? I mean, the other is, non-exclusive. You may also be able to maximize your royalty stream, but you could also be damaging your royalty stream if the market cannot bear all these entities. And, I think we go back to market size. Is that market size big enough for all these entities? Maybe, maybe not. If this technology is really disruptive, it might be a consideration. And since no one chose the option for exclusivity, I do want to mention that in one situation we did decide to have an auction because none of the companies could come to an agreement. They absolutely wanted exclusivity. They were not willing to settle for the non-exclusive. So we decided to generate, a term sheet based on those business plans that we received. And, based on those business plans, we essentially cherry-picked some of the best proposals and basically put them all into this, master term sheet. And some of the terms we recognized would be what we would put in the category of reaches. Like, we knew that we would probably be asking for a little too much, but we wanted to invite some conversation. I mean, you won't have the benefit of seeing the full business plans in this exercise, but what we did there was we asked our industrial advisory board to participate in that selection process. And, when they participated in that, the industrial advisory board was a small subset. So it was a few volunteers who were willing to read these business plans and help make a decision. And then we also had a forum in which we asked the companies to all join. So they emailed their questions in advance, and then we set up a conference call so we could answer the questions so that everyone could hear the same information. And we provided some background for what the selection process and criteria would be, taking into consideration license fee, milestones, business plans, and then how we ended up doing that auction was we set that due date for either accepting that term sheet or providing a counter offer. And in this auction, we did have 5 companies initially approach the laboratory, similar to the companies that you saw. 3 companies ended up, 3 companies ended up dropping out. 2 companies submitted a final business plan and counter offer for this auction, and we ended up choosing one of those companies. And it just so happened that even there was a 3rd company that approached us after this auction, still requesting a license. We ultimately, since we granted an exclusive license, we didn't have those rights to grant. And I think, going through and exploring the ability to be able to grant multiple exclusive licenses would benefit some of the companies that you have in this fact pattern. And I would just want to say, at the end here, I mean, time is of the essence when you are working on these licenses, especially if it's for a startup company, because they do have to deal with fundraising, budget constraints, and a lot of times there's an opportunity for you to make it into the market, and you don't want to miss that opportunity. And as Tom pointed out, there are going to be instances where you want to make sure that you are, abiding by fairness of opportunity, managing your conflict of interest, because you may get calls from your department or agency, as well as various representatives within the laboratory. And you may run into a conversation with the Inspector General, their office, to see if you have properly granted the license. Especially, I've had that in 2 instances where there were exclusive licenses that were being granted. They wanted to make sure that the fairness of opportunity was addressed. One of the first things that they asked for was if that federal business opportunity was filed, and a copy of that, and also copies of communications with each of the companies to show how our discussions were progressing or didn't progress. So I think once you have the deal that is signed, your work is just beginning. I would say, that there's always an opportunity to take a deep breath and celebrate, because we all know that it's never easy to get this done. You've made it this far. So once your work is starting, make sure you keep your lines of communication open with the company, because in a few years, or maybe in a year, they might be coming back to renegotiate. So make sure you stay in contact, with the company. If you license to early stage, you may be, they may require the technical expertise. And I would say there's that opportunity to really cherish and nurture your licensees. I mean, as I alluded earlier, there is no right or wrong, but there is for better or for worse, to throw in a marriage term. Like, you do your best at the time with the information that you get. You're never going to have all the information. One of the things when I started is, what do you wish you knew when you started this job? And I always wish that there was the opportunity for a do-over, but unfortunately that doesn't always exist. I think, you will take a look at all these deals that you do, and, you don't know what's going to happen. So, I mean, I want to go back to that auction that we did do. We did the auction, we selected an exclusive licensee. The company that didn't end up taking the license and still ended up going into this case, they ended up going out of business in 3 years. The exclusive licensee actually ended up pivoting to another technology area. So I think, the lesson there is that, the market conditions change. I mean, the jury's still out on that one. And, when I say check with your licensees, do that often. Sometimes they need a reminder with regards to, when they have their license fees or patent fees due. Work with them during their lean years, and you will be rewarded. I had a licensee that had committed 5 years for technology, and then 2008 happened, so there wasn't much capital around. They ended up having to spend money on payroll, and they asked for a deferral of license fees. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but it did end up meeting with the CEO. We found a way to work in a payment system, kind of like, a couple $100 every month. And within 2 years, that company was acquired, and so we were paid an assignment fee upon that acquisition. And I think that had we terminated the license, we might not have seen the money, or if we had forced the company to pay, they may not have had the capital to run the business. So, I mean, it really can go any way, because, there was also another situation where, that licensee filed bankruptcy. So I think, one of the things that I love about my job is the ability to be able to talk with and see all these different companies, all these technologies get out into the marketplace. And I think the great thing about our job is that we never know what's going to happen from one day to another. We just have to adapt, and I hope that's what you find fun about your job.
So Ida, we've got a couple questions. One is there a place where you go and check for licensees' backgrounds to make sure they're in good standing, etc.?
Yeah, so there's multiple resources. There's, I think a lot of folks, you can check to definitely check the excluded parties list. And then depending on the resources at your laboratory, you can run a check through LexisNexis or Westlaw, those resources, as well as some other, if it's a publicly traded company, you can go through like Factiva. You can always pull information from Hoover's and D&B. So there's a lot of different resources. And it does become a little harder when you're dealing with startup companies, because it just isn't as much public information on them.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, have you ever considered a limited time or time-limited exclusive license?
Yes. So those have been, I would say that I would, if you're dealing with I did have that in dealing with a startup company where we did a time-limited exclusive license with, it was still with the understanding that they would be renegotiating within 3 years. So we wrote into that license agreement that at the 3-year mark, they would still be able to come back and continue with the exclusive if things were going well, and they had various milestones in that agreement that they had to meet.
Okay, thank you. And if others are interested in asking questions, please go ahead and type them in. We have another one here. You mentioned an industrial advisory board in your talk. Can you talk a bit more about this composition, how and when it operates, organized under FACA or not?
Organized under what? I'm sorry?
FACA, that's the act that requires it's a Federal Advisory Committee Act. So when you're bringing in outside parties to advise, you have to operate under what's called FACA. I guess maybe your board doesn't have that.
Yeah, I wasn't, it might have been, but I wasn't familiar with that.
No, you are probably dealing with a GoCo, right?
Yeah, I was dealing with a GoCo.
So that may have been different.
But how that advisory board operated was that there was, I believe, about 10 members on the advisory board. They were from varying industrial entities or retired from industrial entities, and they met once a quarter to talk about what was going on in tech transfer. Some of these folks also were able to provide networking opportunities and different ideas about the technologies as to where they might go or who they might want to introduce that technology to. So we did use that board both for contacts, recommendations, essentially in that advisory capacity. Oftentimes they were probably the first set of eyes on a type of technology and how we were thinking about commercializing. And you always want to be able to talk in a, quote, safe environment to see what, how that technology is adapted, or what the first impressions of that technology are. Because within the laboratory, I think we all run into that situation where some scientists are like, this is $1 billion idea. And when you go in front of a room and give that pitch and you see a bunch of blinking eyes, might not be as great of an idea as you thought.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, yep, here's another one. Where did or do you post your licensing opportunity notices? I am interested in licensing some technology in the San Diego laboratory. Tried to reach out to someone here directly, but did not get any response. Maybe I reached out to the wrong person. What should I do next to get licensed for that technology of interest to me? Did you?
So there's often company websites. I'm not sure what you're looking at. You can always find a way to get in contact with a person, through the various organizations that might exist, from Autumn to the Licensing Executive Society or the University Industry Demonstration Project, UIDP. You can always find information about licensing professionals through those professional societies, as well as, I think, through the FLC. And if you don't get the right person, I would say, just keep trying. Go down the Rolodex and don't be afraid to cold call. The first license that I ever did was a transmission line security monitor, in which I knew nothing about the utilities business, but I got a list of phone numbers from my marketing person who was helping me out at the time, and I cold called into various companies. I did get a few hang-ups and some, polite no thank yous. So I would say just keep trying if you don't get the right person at first.
Yeah, so just an option there too, particularly I know San Diego National Laboratory has a strong tech transfer group that can, call the people that are listed on their website first, but if you're not getting a direct response, reach out to their representative on the FLC, which you should be able to find on the FLC website as well. That might be helpful. We have another question. if the person who just asked the question wants to license a technology from Sandia Labs, have them look at ip.sandia.gov. There you go. There's an answer to a question from one of our participants. That's great. They can fill out a request and the right person will contact them. That's what the response was.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so that's at Sandia. Where'd it go? Just lost it here. ip.sandia.gov. Okay. All right. So another question: do you have an internal deal evaluation review / approval process? If so, who was involved at the agency?
So for the deals, the licenses that we granted, we did not we only had one at the laboratory. We just had a review process where if we were about to enter into the license, we had a checklist that we, ran a background or excluded parties list. We looked in briefly. We got a business plan from the company. And then we also did a peer review of the license with our licensing staff. That was scheduled on a weekly basis. We didn't always have deals on a weekly basis, but it was at least a forum for us to talk with our colleagues about the license terms that we were about to enter into. With respect to some of the things in which we were asking the agency for waiver, such as substantial manufacturing or conflict of interest waiver, it was generally with the agency, our local site office counsel for the Department of Energy, as well as if there was a program manager that had to become involved for, let's say, like conflict of interest. So, I mean, there wasn't a set checklist, but depending on what it was for. If it was for conflict of interest, it would be, the ethics person as well as the lab counsel and agency counsel reviewing what had happened. For the waiver of substantial manufacturing, local DOE counsel at the agency was reviewing along with a DOE program manager.
Great.
That oversaw that program.
Great. Thank you. And with that, I think that we are at the end of our time. So I would once again like to thank Ida for joining us today and providing this unique scenario to walk through for licensing, some real live experience. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I hope you learned something and took something away from this webinar. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Great, and thank you both as well, Tom and Ida, for all the information that you presented today. I do want to just mention a couple of little housekeeping things on your way out. You will have some opportunities to take a survey, either in email or when you close out of here. And so please just take it and let us know, how we did, what other topics you might like to hear. We do have this recorded, so we may be having that up on our site in a while. We will definitely post as well the slides up on our site, federallabs.org. And if anyone is interested, we will be issuing you credit via Credly. It's just a little badge just to share, that you accomplished something today. So you'll get an email from credly.com. I'll just put that in the chat in case anyone's still around. That's credly.com. So that's basically just a way to share, that you were here and that if you feel you learned something, you want to let the world know. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Tom and Ida. And let us know how we did, and we'll hopefully see you again at our next webinar.